أهلا بكم مشاهدينا الكرام إلى هذه الحلقة الجديدة من مستقبل الطاقة. هذه ملفاتنا. محفزات سخية لصناعة الهيدروجين الأخضر في أمريكا، هل تكفي لحجز مكان لها في مستقبل الطاقة؟ الملياردير الذي بدأ بتشغيل أول سفينة تعمل بالهيدروجين الأخضر يتحدث لمستقبل الطاقة ويخبرنا كيف فوجئت بها سلطات الموانئ. أهلا بكم. الهيدروجين الأخضر والذي ينتج عن طريق تقسيم جزيء الماء عبر التحليل الكهربائي يراه البعض بأنه حل سحري لعملية تحول الطاقة، كون يمكن استخدامه في تطبيقات متعددة في القطاعات التي يصعب فيها خفض الانبعاثات مثل الشحن البحري والصناعات الثقيلة. وفي ضوء الفرص المستقبلية الهائلة الكامنة في هذا الوقود، قامت إدارة الرئيس الأمريكي بايدن عام 2022 بضم ائتمان ضريبي غير محدود للهيدروجين النظيف في قانون خفض التضخم، والذي يعتبر أهم تشريع مناخي أمريكي، ما قد يجعل الولايات المتحدة أحد أهم وجهات المستثمرين العالميين في هذا الوقود الأخضر. في هذا السياق وفي الأسبوع الأخير من نهاية العام الماضي أعلنت وزارة الخزانة الأمريكية عن الشروط والمعايير التي تعرف ما هو الهيدروجين الأخضر ومن هو المؤهل للاستفادة من الائتمان الضريبي الذي يصل إلى $3 للطن، وهو ما قد يؤسس لمعيار عالمي في تداول وتجارة الهيدروجين النظيف. وقد اشتملت المعايير على 3 عناصر أساسية. أولاً، على منتجي الهيدروجين استخدام طاقات متجددة من الشبكة الإقليمية للمشروع لضمان القرب الجغرافي. ثانياً، يجب ألا تكون الطاقة المتجددة المستخدمة في المشروع من محطة يزيد عمرها عن 3 سنوات مقارنة بموعد بدء الإنتاج الأولي للهيدروجين، وذلك لضمان تشييد محطات جديدة للطاقات المتجددة لتشغيل تلك المشاريع. ثالثاً، حتى عام 2027 سيتم مطابقة حجم الطاقة المتجددة المستخدمة مع حجم تشغيل أجهزة التحليل الكهربائي بشكل سنوي، ولكن بحلول عام 2028 تصبح المطابقة في كل ساعة، وذلك بهدف ضمان نظافة الهيدروجين المنتج. يجدر التنويه هنا بأنه في حال عدم وضع معايير صارمة تحكم نظافة الهيدروجين المنتج عبر التحليل الكهربائي للمياه، فإن هذه العملية قد ينتج عنها في الولايات المتحدة انبعاثات تزيد ب75% عن تلك الانبعاثات الصادرة عن إنتاج الهيدروجين الرمادي من الغاز الطبيعي من دون احتجاز للكربون، وذلك بحسب شركة استشارات الطاقة بلومبرج NEF. ولكن وبالرغم من هذا التحفيز الحكومي الأمريكي لإنتاج الهيدروجين النظيف، يرى البعض أن ما ينقص هذه السوق هو الطلب وغياب أي تشريعات لخلقه أو لدعمه، حيث أنه وبالرغم من تعددية استخداماته كوقود في العديد من التطبيقات الصناعية من النقل ووصولاً إلى إنتاج الكهرباء، يرى الخبراء بأن جدواه الاقتصادية غير مثبتة بعد في جميع تلك الاستخدامات، ما يدفع هؤلاء إلى جعل أولوية استخدامه محصورة في الحالات التي لا يمكن فيها زيادة كفاءة الطاقة أو تلك التي يستحيل كهربتها مثل صناعة الصلب أو إنتاج الأسمدة. بالتالي قد تكون الولايات المتحدة قد جعلت نفسها سوقاً جذابة لإنتاج الهيدروجين النظيف، إلا أن القضية هي عدم وجود سوق جاذبة للطلب على الهيدروجين بعد. من النظرية إلى التطبيق. الملياردير الأسترالي أندرو فورست يعد من أكبر المتحمسين لإدخال الهيدروجين الأخضر في قطاع الشحن البحري، وقد أطلق بالفعل أول سفينة تعمل بوقود الأمونيا الخضراء الذي يتم إنتاجه من الهيدروجين الأخضر، ولديه تجربة يرويها لمستقبل الطاقة في المفاجأة التي أحدثتها سفينته لسلطات الموانئ التي لم تكن تعلم أن هذا النوع الجديد من السفن قد بدأ الإبحار بالفعل. فورست هو مؤسس ورئيس شركة فورتسكيو ميتلز جروب الأسترالية، وهي من أكبر شركات التعدين في العالم، وهو أحد أكثر المستثمرين حماسة للهيدروجين الأخضر. وحديثنا معه بدأ حول نظريته الرطوبة القاتلة، وهي من آثار الاحتباس الحراري، ولكنها أكثر خطراً من ارتفاع درجات الحرارة على حد قوله. لنتابع ما يقصده أندرو فورست بهذه النظرية.
So we as a human race, as a species, we can actually handle heat, but it's not heat which is going to kill us. It is the rapidly escalating rise in humidity caused by heat. Now, and it's running at several times quicker than the rise in heat. It's humidity which shuts down the human's ability to thermoregulate, for you to be able to release the energy which you release all the time. If you can't release that energy within minutes to hours, depending on your health, your age, your infancy, etc., if you're on medication, you'll die. Maximum 6 hours, shortest in minutes. And we as a planet have not experienced levels of humidity which we're receiving now. It's come from the oceans. As oceans expel more water vapor, they create these violent weather events, which are also new, but they're also creating humidity which humans can't escape unless they can get air conditioning. And please don't have any viewer in the Middle East think they can rely on air conditioning, because when you get a lethal heat and lethal humidity event, every air conditioner goes on and the grid shuts down. It means your beautiful hotel room or house could well become a coffin.
What do governments need to do in terms of facilitating the policy shifts in order to accelerate the proliferation and deployment of renewable energy?
So over time, say over this decade, we need to phase out the $1 trillion odd of subsidies, which are really stopping the, as you say, proliferation of green energy.
The fossil fuel subsidies.
Fossil fuel subsidies, thank you, sir. So we have right now a government-enforced blocker to renewable energy called massive government subsidies on fossil fuel. Second, we need to price the damage which fossil fuel does in a proper global carbon tax. Third, bring in incentives, just roll what's killing us into what will save us for anything green. The Middle East in particular has a fantastic opportunity to capture way more energy than ever it's got underneath its feet, just from the movement of wind and the advancing, sadly, heat, which is bearing down on the Middle East, bearing down on the world because of global warming. Let's capture that and drive what is killing us out of the atmosphere.
But renewables today, Dr. Forrest, are not being deployed at the rate needed to decarbonize electricity, let alone make hydrogen. Producing hydrogen is highly intensive. It could easily consume the green energy that could have, powered our homes, our cars. Are you worried that green hydrogen could lead to an unhealthy competition between green hydrogen and the grid, which eventually could reduce or even reverse the overall intended climate effect?
Let's just look at that. If we're all fighting over one oil well in UAE or Saudi Arabia, then that argument would stick. But we're not. We've got oil wells all over the world, okay? As more and more energy was needed, more and more oil got pumped out of the ground. That obvious logic seems to stop when people think about renewable energy. They think, oh no, it's going to run out. Actually, it's so much more infinite than oil and gas will ever be. No, we just need to continue growing the renewable energy out. The energy market there is obviously the same as the oil and gas market now. It's tens of trillions of dollars. That's the capacity of that market. Do we need to grow it out? Do we need to stop subsidizing the extinction of every person in the Middle East and the human race? Yeah, we do. That's probably common sense. Second, do we need to put a price on the poison which we breathe and which is cooking our atmosphere? Do we need to put a price on that? Of course we do. That's logical too. These are the simple steps. Do we need to encourage? Do we need to do that? Of course we need to do that. These are the simple steps we need to take to make sure that there's abundant, very cheap energy from solar, from wind, from the other source of renewable energy to fully power the world. And of course, if we don't do it, then we're exposing our citizens to a very, very uncomfortable death, and people are dying from this death called lethal humidity as I speak. China, North America, India, Middle East, it gets misdiagnosed as heat stress, heart attack, etc., but it's humidity-caused death.
Announced hydrogen projects today up until 2030. Despite its small size, it still exceeds projected demand. What needs to be done to foster demand for green hydrogen?
Yeah, so I don't know what projected demands we're looking at here, but I obviously haven't seen them because our customers are looking for green hydrogen and green ammonia in terms of millions and millions of tons, not thousands, millions. And just floating in the harbour, not far from where we are in the Dubai Marina, is the world's first hydrogen-fuelled ship. Now, it wasn't able to sail in here because the Dubai port authorities, like all the other port authorities around the world, haven't got around to allowing in pollution-free ships. They'll allow in ships which are going to kill your kids with bunker sea oil, with diesel, that come right on in. But ammonia hydrogen-powered ship, oh, sorry, you got to wait. So as I've spoken to the heads of the Dubai port authorities, like I have the Los Angeles port authorities or Hong Kong or Rotterdam, they were saying, okay, we didn't know the technology was here. We didn't know there was the demand. Well, the technology is here, there is the demand. Now we've got to get on and produce it. And the world shipping industry has got to look at the Fortescue Green Pioneer and say, oh my God, hydrogen-fueled ships are here. We're not letting it in because our regulations are so archaic, so backwards. We can fix that. Let's get hydrogen shipping going. And I'm going to say to all my friends in the oil and gas sector who really don't like the look of that ship, who really have stopped support being given to hydrogen ships around the world, who have stopped support for, say, even Dubai ports, to really get excited about this, I want to say to them in the eye, hey, yes, you can make a fortune from energy, but it's not oil and gas. The problem is you have to change, not your market, you.
And do you foresee green ammonia to be the leading end-use sector for green hydrogen?
I think in the short term it will be, because it can just do anything which bunker sea oil or diesel can do. It's just a slow-burning fuel exactly like them, needs an accelerant. So it can do everything it can, and you can transport it all over the world. You can make it in bulk from green sources. If you try and make it from fossil fuel sources, of course, you're going to speed up global warming and you're faking it. If it's made from a green source, you're not going to multiply the carbon dioxide in the air through making ammonia, which is how hundreds of millions of tons of ammonia are made right now through burning fossil fuel, destroying our planet. It can be made from renewable electricity, so let's make it from renewable electricity.
My last question with regards to the electrolyzer, that part of the value chain, what needs to be happening right now in order to foster all this talk about green hydrogen supply and demand?
Okay, so I think what the Americans did was pretty smart. They put a tax credit on an industry which doesn't even exist, and all the bankers have run off and they've priced that tax credit. It's obviously paper money because the industry doesn't even exist yet, but they've given you a $3 credit as a tax credit on this industry, which they'd love to see getting going, and that realises into a proper credit right now. So if you want to get the electrolyzer industry ramped up, use this, if you like, paper money, which is give a credit on an industry which doesn't yet exist. But if it gets into existence, if it gets rolling and makes a profit, pays tax, you'll give a credit. That is so smart. It just will fire the industry right now, cost the ratepayer, the public, not a cent.
نتوقف الآن مع فاصل قصير نتابع بعده في مستقبل الطاقة. هل تكفي الطاقة المتجددة وحدها لحل مشكلة الانبعاثات؟ أهلا بكم من جديد إلى مستقبل الطاقة. أي دور للنفط والغاز في مستقبل مزيج الطاقة؟ سؤال يشكل محور النقاشات حول كيفية الوصول إلى صافي صفر انبعاثات بين معسكرين، أحدهما لا يرى للوقود الأحفوري دورا على المدى البعيد، وفريق يرى أن الابتكار التكنولوجي يمكن أن يوفر حلا لمشكلة الانبعاثات من دون الحاجة إلى التخلي تماما عن النفط والغاز. ضيفي التالي أدير تيرنر، رئيس لجنة تحولات الطاقة ETC، يعد أحد أبرز الخبراء العالميين في مجال أبحاث تحول الطاقة، وقد تحدثت إليه عن المستقبل الذي يتصوره لمزيج الطاقة بحلول منتصف هذا القرن والتحديات التي تواجه عملية احتساب البصمة الكربونية. لنتابع.
Well, this is an issue which at the Energy Transition Commission we've just produced a report on called Fossil Fuels in Transition. But our conclusion is that we do have to commit to a rapid phase down of the use of fossil fuels. Essentially, if we're to get to net zero by mid-century, you can either do that by continuing to use fossil fuels, but using carbon capture and storage or removals to offset it, or you can actually reduce fossil fuel use. We think that the reductions will have to come 85% from reducing actual fossil fuel use and only 15% from carbon capture and removal. So we are talking in our report about reducing the use of gas by between, say, 55 to 70% by 2050, coal 80 to 85%, and oil, this one is the one we may really surprise people, by somewhere between 75 and 95% by 2050. And we do see a role for carbon capture and storage and removals, but we think it has to be a limited role. We don't think that it is prudent or credible to assume that oil or gas use can continue at the current level out into the mid-century and that one can just offset that by huge amounts of carbon capture and storage. We think the optimal path will entail a very significant reduction in the actual use and therefore the supply of fossil fuels.
The critical minerals and materials will definitely play a central role in the energy transition, but securing enough supplies and at the right time is a huge challenge. How can this be addressed, ensuring it's also done in an environmentally friendly way?
Yes, if you look at what we have to do to get to net zero emissions, at the absolute core of it is a much bigger electricity system and the electrification of many sectors of the economy, in particular road transport. And that requires nickel or manganese or cobalt for batteries. It involves lithium. The electricity system will require copper. Wind turbines have rare earths like neodymium within them. Earlier this year at the Energy Transition Commission, we produced a report looking at all of those different minerals. There is no fundamental shortage of their existence in the earth. There are lots of those minerals out there, but two things are concerning. One, the pace at which we can develop the increased supply that we need. It is possible, but it requires a lot of investment. And, as you say, the actual local environmental impact of it, both the local environmental impact and the carbon intensity. Now, even at the current carbon intensity of mining and producing those minerals, it still makes a lot of sense to buy an electric car, not a fossil fuel car. You're still doing a lot of good for the climate. But it's very important for us to drive the supply chains of those critical minerals down towards net zero. For instance, by making sure that all these big nickel refineries that are being built in Indonesia are powered by renewable energy rather than coal energy. And I think what we're going to see increasingly are regulations which require that electric vehicles have an account of where the battery came from, and battery producers can say where the minerals came from, and the mineral producer can say how much carbon was used in producing it. We're going to end up with, and we should end up with, very tightly defined carbon cycle analysis, and that will help us make sure that these critical minerals are produced in an environmentally sound fashion.
Well, this raises the question of, carbon accounting and the standardization of that accounting, which we're still far off from. But let me move on to the financing costs costs and the expectations of higher for longer interest rates. How do you foresee this affecting renewable energy, given that this sector is very sensitive to capital costs and interest rates?
Yes, you're right. Renewable energy is particularly sensitive to capital costs because unlike a fossil fuel plant like a gas turbine, in the case of renewables, there's almost no operating cost. Once you've built it, you get the electricity at zero marginal cost, but all the cost is in the capital up front. And that means that the cost of capital is hugely important. Now, we don't know what's going to happen to interest rates, but I think we are probably in an environment where we should anticipate that real interest rates will stay somewhat higher for some period of time than they were before 2020. And that does increase the levelized cost of renewables. Now, in the case of solar, I think the cost reductions which we are now seeing in the actual cost of solar PV panels is so fast that it will overwhelm that. So for instance, Aqua Power, I know in Saudi Arabia, about 2 years ago, won a solar PV auction at just $10.40 per megawatt hour, 1 cent per kilowatt hour. You wouldn't see that this year because of the higher cost of capital, but I think you'll see it in 3 or 4 years' time simply because the panels will get so cheap. So the long-term trends of cost reduction in the renewable technologies are still there, but there is a higher cost of capital, and that has increased the cost at least for a period of time. It has reduced, it has been a temporary setback to what I think will still be a long-term reducing cost trend.
But is that the same thing what's happening with the wind energy, specifically in offshore?
Wind is challenged and offshore wind challenged to a greater extent than solar, though I still think the long-term trends are there, and the giveaway in this respect is China, which is installing huge amounts of offshore wind this year and where the cost of turbines are continuing to come down. So that tells us that the technological trends are still there. But what we've had in Northwest Europe, in particular in the North Sea and in the US, is various contracts getting cancelled. You've seen some big write-offs. What occurred there is some people entered into contracts which were not index linked, inflation index linked, at a time where they just assumed that inflation would be 2% forever. And those contracts also allowed them to get out of the contract with very little penalties. Well, that was a formula for people for overbidding, but then pulling out. We also had an increase in the cost of steel, but that has reversed. We also had some countries getting a little bit greedy and trying to put in maximum prices within auctions which were too tight, and in the UK that we therefore saw an auction round where there were no offshore wind bids. I think these are important challenges for us to deal with, as well as the challenges of the speed at which you can connect to the grid and planning and permitting. But I think there are actions that we can take which will put that crucial technology, particularly crucial technology in Europe, back on the path it was on before.
وبهذا مشاهدينا نصل إلى ختام هذه الحلقة من مستقبل الطاقة. نلقاكم في نفس الموعد الأسبوع المقبل. تابعونا على تويتر أو منصة إكس على هاشتاغ مستقبل الطاقة. إلى اللقاء.